Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for taking your time over lunch to participate or listen to our webinar here on an introduction and overview of the Small Business Innovation Research and Small Business Technology Transfer Program. This is not going to be overly extensive. Should give some highlights and high-level information for you. I was able to take a quick look at our registrants, and I noticed about half of our registrants and folks that said they were going to participate are actual providers like myself. So I want to let you know that I'm available if you have groups of companies in your regions or areas that you think would be interested in hearing more detailed information on SBIR and STTR. I'm more than willing to come to your location and do a mini session in person, if that's the case. Also, for the companies that are on the webinar, if you're interested in more information, learning more, or would like to have a conversation with me, obviously right here is my information, both my email address and my direct line phone number. So to get started, this is what I plan to cover. Hopefully I'll get through all of it. If I skip quickly through some of the slides at the end, which would be under the bullet things to note and advice, the reason I'm going to move past those relatively quickly is because I want to ensure that I tell you a little bit about our Innovation Partnership Program, which is the assistance program for companies that are located within Pennsylvania and interested in getting assistance for their SBIR and STTR or potentially other federal funding opportunity proposal submissions. So we're going to do a program overview, why or why not you might be interested in SBIR and STTR, what the differences are in the two programs, and why you might be interested in using one or the other mechanism. The participating agencies, which is very important, eligibility, things to note and advice and an overview of our Innovation Partnership Program. So, excuse me. The mission of the SBIR and STTR programs at the federal level is to support scientific excellence in technology innovation through investment of federal research funds in critical American priorities to build a strong national economy, one small business at a time. I think you'll find that the legislation that enables the SBIR and STTR programs to operate is overseen by the Small Business Administration, hence the ... one small business at a time. The purpose of the programs is to stimulate technology innovation in the private sector, strengthen the role of small business concerns, small business SBCs, you'll see that acronym used throughout a majority of the presentation here, in meeting federal R&D needs, increase commercialization from research results at our universities or research institutions throughout the country, encourage participation of socially and economically disadvantaged and women-owned businesses. I would also include in that there's emphasis placed on veteran-owned businesses and those in underserved and underrepresented regions of the country. This is not an alternative source of funding for basic research. So in other words, if you are operating currently at a research institution or a higher education institution and conducting research, and you've been extremely successful in receiving research grants throughout your tenure, but for some reason that funding stream has reduced or dried up, while it's interesting and you can attempt to be creative in continuing to get that research funded, this would not be the approach to use for that. I want to note too, which I forgot to say initially in the beginning, if as I'm going through the slides, there's something that strikes you and you have a question, I would encourage you to type your question into the Q&A area of the screen so that when we're finished and there's enough time available, I'll be able to address your questions. I know as we typically go through the slides that you may have a question on a particular slide, and by the time we get to the end of it, you may not recall what your question was. So if you want to just type your question in there, and hopefully we'll have enough time to address some of them. And if not, I can try to do a follow-up FAQ or Q&A if there are tons of questions that we don't get to. Okay, thanks. So why would you consider SBIR and STTR? Well, there's over $2.5 billion available in these funds, and over $50 billion available in other funds for federal R&D programs. Sometimes SBIR and STTR awardees are benefited by receiving these awards, and then that looks good as they seek to apply for other potential funding and or contracts with the federal agencies. So it could be an entree for you to actually doing business with the government and having them as a customer. This is not a loan. There's no repayment, so it is a grant. I'll talk a little bit later in the presentation about some of the different forms the agreement of receiving these funds takes between the different agencies. It provides recognition, verification, visibility, and potential for leveraging tools to attract venture capital and other funding sources. So let me give you a for instance there. For instance, Ben Franklin Technology Partners is an investment organization with 4 different centers around Pennsylvania, and they have different programs to assist technology-focused companies and make financial investments in them to assist them in growing and commercializing their businesses as well. SBIR and STTR can be beneficial in that if you have been successful in receiving those awards, it looks very positive as you approach other organizations like Ben Franklin or the Science Center for other forms of investment or funding, because it shows that you have been diligent and read and followed instructions of the federal agencies and been successful in your quarterly reporting and executing on the actual project that you said you were going to do to move your innovation forward. So it is a very good leveraging tool that if you've been successful in this realm, it can help you in other areas to receive other types of investment and or funding. Why consider SBIR and STTR programs? This is another couple points here. Fosters partnerships. You can partner with large and small corporations, with academic institutions of higher education or research institutions. Small business concerns can be recognized as a national resource of technological innovation. IP rights are normally retained by the small businesses. And what you'll find is, as I move through this presentation, I'm going to use words like generally and sometimes and most of the time, because you'll see the number of different agencies involved in, and when we get to that slide, I can address why I generalize so much on this overview. It also provides money for high-risk projects because majority of the projects that are coming into the process are starting out as a phase 1. I'll talk about that, which is generally proof of concept. So proof of concept stage of investment or influx of funding for that stage of development that is not embedded in a research institution is extremely high risk, which we all know. And finally, creating jobs and generating taxes. Obviously, the investment that the government makes and we make with our tax dollars in this program is designed specifically for that, and also to make our country more competitive. Information on each of the SBIR and STTR programs. All right, so Small Business Innovation Research is what SBIR stands for. And there are 11 different federal agencies, if you weren't aware, where SBIR and STTR is offered. So As I said in the beginning, the enabling legislation, the oversight of the SBIR and STTR programs is with the SBA. And there's somewhat of a misnomer there in that we all say SBIR and STTR programs. Well, the reality is there are 11 different programs, okay? Because each of the 11 different agencies has different solicitation time frames, different topics, different registration policies, which I'll review for you as well, and different schedules, different payment levels can range from $80,000 to $235,000 or $225,000 for phase one. So while we say SBIR and STTR, really there are 11 different programs. Hence, the need for overviews like this and or a lot of guidance that occurs with assisting clients to submit to an appropriate topic or agency under an appropriate solicitation and aligning those two things well. So that this is important to understand in advance. Again, I always like to manage expectations, and knowing some of these issues in advance is really important when working with clients, or if you are a client and you're interested in submitting a proposal. There needs to be a starting point, and knowing which agency or which topic is best aligned to your innovation is obviously a really important starting point. So a little bit of background on that second bullet there, greater level of detail on how these are structured and how the funds are allocated. A lot of times I get asked the question is when the federal government's budget has been in jeopardy of being approved, is the SBIR and STTR program in jeopardy, or does the SBIR and STTR programs become jeopardized if certain legislation doesn't pass and those sorts of things. So the reality is, as long as the general budget is passed at the federal level for the agencies that have line items in these 11 different agencies, then the programs are still operational, because this is based on the general budget allocation at the federal level to each of the federal agencies that participate. So STTR is 10% of the size of the SBIR program. And again, that means Small Business Technology Transfer. The acronym doesn't translate equally with the actual name of the program, STTR. But in any case, it's similar to SBIR. However, these projects need to be structured in cooperation involving the small business concern and a research institution, which can be a college or university, a federally funded research laboratory, or nonprofit research institution. STTR is created to transfer the technologies from those organizations and institutions collaboratively out to the businesses. And I should note this, which I didn't earlier because I address it further on in the presentation, but one of the distinguishing qualities of SBIR and STTR is that the research institution or college or university or laboratory or nonprofit research institution is not and cannot be the applicant for these funds. The applicant must be the small business concern. So that's a large distinguishing feature because you have to have yourself established as a business, and there are a whole bunch of registrations, and I'll show you those as we move forward as well. So of the SBIR, 11 SBIR and STTR agencies, there are 5 of those agencies that are required by to participate and offer STTR, to reserve a portion of their R&D funds for that. So here's a list of the agencies, the 11 different agencies. The ones in red and with the asterisk are the agencies that participate in STTR. So what you'll notice here, and I'm going to show you some statistics coming up, is Department of Defense, National Institutes of Health, and National Science Foundation. These are the largest funding organizations or agencies that have the most amount of money. So the ones that are in red that have STTR, the reason is because their extramural R&D budget is significantly greater than the ones that only offer STTR. So some useful statistics. I mean, we can't talk about federal funding and these types of programs without trying to give some benchmarks and allow you to have some understanding of where the funds reside, how much is available, and just, you know, again, managing your expectations on possible awards. So the amount of funding, and I will say this is 2016 numbers. These numbers do not vacillate dramatically from year to year. So, I mean, one year it could be 2.5 billion available, another year it could be 2.8 billion available for the combined programs, but it doesn't move that dramatically. So these numbers are pretty much the same for 2018 as they would be on what you're seeing here. So you can see that there's a significant difference between the 5 agencies that offer SBIR and STTR and the SBIR only. So clearly your probability of winning an award from the EPA is dramatically different than winning one from DoD or National Institutes of Health, strictly because of the availability of funds and the small amount of funding available. So, and that's nationally. So this is the amount of funds nationally that each agency has to award under each of these particular programs. And I know this is really busy, but luckily you can see it better on your device than you would be if we were sitting in a conference room and it were being projected. So those first 3 columns there are the first 2 columns are a number of awards. That's not the number of companies receiving an award, because there tend to be a lot of companies who receive multiple awards, and that's not addressing that. The national numbers there are actually actual award numbers. So there's the national award dollar amount in the 3rd column, and the percentage of awards that PA has garnered, or companies in Pennsylvania has garnered in that particular agency during that year, and then the number of awards and the dollar amount. So for 2016, we have over 203 awards garnering over $81 million. Just to let you know, statistically, in the whole country, Pennsylvania typically falls within 7th, 8th, or 9th. Depending upon the year, we vacillate between those 3 positions in the top 10 SBIR recipient states in the country. So our state tends to be very successful in having clients win these awards consistently, at least in the past decade or so. So that looks good for all of us. I just put this pie chart together this morning. My other one was a little bit outdated. So this is a snapshot of PA federal awards of SBIR and STTR from 2012 to 2017. Clearly, you can see where the majority of awards are, the 2 largest funded agencies, and who the laggers are there: Department of Commerce, EPA, and the other federal agencies. So again, just to give you a snapshot what's going on here. So how is SBIR and STTR, how are these programs structured? Okay, so they're structured in phases, and that's the familiar terminology. You'll hear everybody speaking about it that way. Phase 1 would be the startup phase, and the awards of up to $150,000. Oh, I thought I changed this, but it's actually up to $225,000 or $235,000, depending upon the agency. And the execution period for the project, that's another piece of terminology as well. When we're talking about submission of a proposal, your proposal is project based. So you'll be describing a project that you are doing and proposing to execute to the federal agency that you're applying to. So that's what the phase 1 is for. It's for feasibility and proof of concept. Phase 2 are awards of up to $1 million, and wow, I thought I changed that too. So it's usually 1.2, 1.5 million. It was 750,000 for a number of years. And this execution period, again, depending upon the agency, can be up to 2 years. Only phase 1 award winners are considered for phase 2. That's generally the case. There have been a lot of variations in the past couple of most recent years to that statement, in that there's something called a fast track that combines a phase 1 and phase 2. We don't recommend first-time applicants apply for a fast track. We've seen little to no success with that approach. If you've been awarded previous SBIR and STT awards, fast track might be an option for you. That would be something we would want to discuss with you directly. There's also something called a direct to phase 2 with NIH, and that would be when a lot of preliminary work and data has been done and gathered. It kind of combines phase 1 and phase 2, but a majority of your phase 1's already been executed and it's provable, and you can provide data and information to move on to that phase 2 request. Again, that's something that we would have to look very closely at least through the Innovation Partnership Assistance Program. We haven't had hardly any clients that have attempted to apply for that in at least the last 8 years. Phase 3. Phase 3 is, again, one of those things that is sort of a misnomer. They say it's a 3-phase program, but the reality is there are no federal funds granted for a phase 3 stage of development. Phase 3 is really commercialization. And so it's called phase 3 because if you were receiving your award from, let's say, an agency like DoD, which is a contracting agency, and I'll explain that in a little bit here, there's the potential for the DoD to actually be a customer of yours, hence, quote unquote, commercialization. So you could be a prime contractor with the DoD or a subcontractor to a prime contractor, which means that you've graduated and moved on from phase 2 of their grant funding to phase 3 of them actually being a customer of yours. But there are no grant funds available for what's considered to be that phase 3 of funding. So this is a visual representation of what we just discussed. I think this is where I made the changes as opposed to in the actual text. So phase 1 is 6 months up to 225 or 235. Phase 2, 2 years, 1.5. Prototype development demonstration. Phase 3 is typically non-SBIR. Final development commercialization. So program eligibility. I'm going to move a little bit quicker here because I have a lot of slides and we're getting short on time already. It's like a half hour in. So who can qualify? So you have to be a small business. Remember that SBC, the acronym Small Business Concern. You must meet certain eligibility criteria. So you have to be greater than 51% American-owned and independently operated. So I've had a lot of questions previously about international virtual companies where folks have their team in different countries, and that's one issue, but it has to be 51% American-owned and operated. Also, a majority of the project needs to be executed in the United States as well. So they're really, while we're in this highly virtual environment today and technology has afforded us the ability to collaborate around the world. That's all fine and good, but for the purposes of this program, they're really not looking at how to work with virtual companies who collaborate around the world. They're really looking at, can you, is your company 51% owned and operated in the United States, and will the project be executed in the United States? And this is nothing new, just to give you a heads up. The program was established a number of years ago, and this has been the rule ever since it was originated. So the company has to be for profit. The PI, principal researcher, principal investigator, must be primarily employed by the business concern at the time of award. And I will say this, that that's the rule and that's how it's written. But the PI, we encourage you to have all of your moving parts nailed down well in advance of actually submitting your actual federal proposal to the deadline. So the PI needs to be employed primarily with the company prior to the award, or at least should be able to indicate that in one sentence in the actual proposal. If you're working with the innovation partnership, we'll want to see that. We'll want to know that that commitment is there. So it also encourages research partnerships. And, you know, when we say small business, the federal definition of a small business under the Small Business Administration is less than 500 employees. And probably all of you are rolling your eyes. You may or may not have known that, but that's a lot of employees. From the standpoint of the innovation partnership, we typically see companies that have 5 employees or less, and more reasonably, most of our companies that we assist have 3 or less employees. So we're talking extremely small companies, not the 499 employees, so to speak. There are companies that are extremely successful for many, many years with SBIR and STTR. I think they run a majority of their business on their SBIR and and I swear that they keep their employment level at 499 employees so that they can continue to qualify for multiple awards a year. That's really not the intent of the program, and we at the Innovation Partnership would not be working with a company that is motivated in that manner. So subcontractor eligibility, this is important because a lot of times you may be looking to have a partner company, organization do a portion of the work, or it just makes sense for that company to do that type of work. Statistical analysis, quantification of certain assays or things like that, something that you can contract out that there's no reason for you to do in-house because your focus lies elsewhere. So you can subcontract out, and they can play a role in the research team. This should be clearly articulated in your project proposal and delineated what role the subcontractor will play, how much of the work that they will do, and what exactly the work it is that they will do. So in a phase 1, you can subcontract for around 33% of the work that's to be executed, which means that 67% of the project work has to be done by the company itself. For phase 2, they give you a little more leeway there because obviously you're further along in your innovation development in that cycle, so they're going to give you more latitude, and they understand that there may be a larger percentage of the work that you prefer to have subcontracted out by a company that's expert in that area instead of recreating the wheel and doing that work in-house. So those subcontractors can be large or small. It doesn't matter, what the size of those contractors are, and it can be an individual consultant or a company, or it can be a nonprofit. So there's a bit of latitude on who you can subcontract and what work. But again, you'll see that statement, all the work still has to be done in the United States. Who can qualify? Proposers have to meet certain eligibility to participate in the program. This is STTR, and I have a little grid coming up, so if it's still not clear what the difference is, I mean, obviously you've seen already that it's of the entire SBIR program, which is extremely small by comparison, and there are only 5 of the 11 agencies that participate in and offer STTR. So it needs to include joint research. 40% of the work that needs to be done by the small business, and 30% of the business, minimum of 30% of the work can be done by the nonprofit research institution. The remaining 30%, so that 40 and that 30 are both minimum amounts. So the remaining 30 can be done by a combination of the business and the nonprofit research institution. For the STTR, the PI, excuse me, may be at the university or from the small business concern. Certain agencies stipulate you need to be careful about reading those instructions. That's one thing I forgot to mention and highlight, that a majority of this whole process, this whole gauntlet, why is this so confusing? Why are there so many different rules? Why are there different solicitation deadlines and formats and registrations? I mean, it's really a gauntlet. And the gauntlet is, can you read and follow instructions? And it's extremely important. I cannot emphasize enough that reading and following instructions in these solicitation packages that they put out is paramount, and it's probably about 90% of the whole effort. So it's really important. So when I get to that bullet point and I say PI maybe at the university or from the small business concern, really it depends on the agency, and that definition of inclusion or the role or the percentage or where they need to be located is all outlined in each solicitation each agency puts out when they put it out. So you have to read everything, believe me. Research institution eligibility for STTR. So it needs to be a nonprofit. It can be a nonprofit college or university, public or private, a nonprofit surgical hospital, or a federally funded R&D center, FFRDC. Or so no go-go's. And I always say, that's my little joke. Is probably the only joke that I have is what do you think a go-go is? And it's actually government owned and government operated is what that stands for. So that wasn't very funny, but moving along, federal labs, and these are examples of federal labs. Well, this is eligibility, so you can read that yourself. The definition of what meets the following nonprofit college or research institution is defined in the Stevenson-Weidler Technology Innovation Act of 1980. I know you need to know that because you're going to run out and look it up. So it needs to be owned and operated exclusively for scientific or educational purposes. No profits benefiting private shareholders or an individual. So those are the standards for what meets that research institution eligibility for participation in the STTR as a partner with a small business. I know it's a mouthful, but so federal labs in Pennsylvania, just in case you were interested. I know we may or may not have folks on the phone on the call here watching the webinar who are outside of Pennsylvania, but I always think it's interesting to, in case you didn't know, one of those pieces of little trivia, where the federal labs are located and what they actually are. So there's your list. Program differences. So we did talk about that a little bit, but here's a nice little grid for you. The phase 1 is 6 to 9 months and STTR 6 to 12 months. And in case you're wondering, this webinar will be made available with the audio on PennTAP's website as a reference, and there'll be a link. So I'll be able to send it to you, or my colleagues at PennTAP will be able to send it to the registration list in case you're interested in seeing what the slides are and hearing the discussion surrounding each of the slides. STTR. So the PI, I said this before, I'll say it again, the PI can be at the research institution, at all the agencies but NSF, and some DoD areas. NIH and NSF also have STTR specifics on the amount of PI participation. Like I said, where I hit that point and I said you have to read and follow instructions, right here is one of the caveats to that global generally. When I say generally, here's a little more specifics on that. But again, the feds change things off and on and embed them in the solicitation directions and instructions. I'm not always privy to them, and sometimes actually a client may highlight for me, did you know about this, Kelly? And I'll say, you know what, I didn't. I have to go read that to see if it's actually something that is newly instituted that the agency is going to continue with, or it's just a provision that for that one particular solicitation. So at Department of Energy, the PI can be at the research institution unless also submitting a proposal for SBIR funding, in which case the PI must be at the small business concern. So there's another exception. So I think you'll find that there are more exceptions than standards of norm across all these 11 agencies when we're talking about these programs. Here's the main SBIR and STTR differences. If you remember nothing else, remember this, that STTR, there's mandatory participation by the nonprofit or R&D institution, and with SBIR, the participation of that organization or institution is allowed, but it's optional. Okay. Let's see here. Agency differences. I said I was going to talk about this. Contracts versus grants. So I know you heard me say earlier on that this is grant funding. It is. It's all grant funding. However, the form of agreement that you will be signing if you receive an award from the agency takes a different form sometimes. Sometimes you're signing an agreement which is a contract, and sometimes you're signing an agreement to receive your money, which is a grant contract. So, or grant agreement versus a contract agreement. And this is just a little grid, again, to show you the differences. Just a word on this. So why would there be a difference, and why do they exist? So DOD, as I mentioned, that phase 3 where no grant funds are really available. And I said, you know, they're a contracting agency because why? Because they might be interested in procuring whatever innovation it is that they provided you grant funds to develop. It makes sense. Look at DOD. So if they're looking for something that they can deploy, some solution for desalination of water, let's say, that's lightweight, disposable, biodegradable, and all those good things. And they wanted somebody to develop that and under a certain cost point, and you did that, and you're the company that did that, and they now need it. They want it. They want to use it. So they may contract with you or through a prime contractor, that subcontract, where you're providing a subcontract to purchase that portable, biodegradable desalination thing for the troops, right? So they may, there would be your phase 3. Your phase 3 would be that contract. So they actually, agencies that offer contracts tend to be in a position to acquire or purchase the innovation that you have developed. And the granting agencies, well, they offer the opportunity for the for the topic area, but it's more generalized, and they're not going to be a purchaser of your resultant innovation. Okay, so here again, I'm going to move a little quickly here again, just to get to further on. Maybe you want to see some of the advice. So grants versus contracts. Again, this is just outlining what I sort of said to you on the last slide. Grants, the broad topics, investigator defined, and those are the agencies. One of the big things that differentiates them as you're preparing to submit, proposal is the lines of communication. There's a large difference between contracts and grants. The lines of communication tend to be relatively open in advance of submitting your proposal for a grant opportunity. And contracts, there's typically a quiet period. So there's an upcoming DoD deadline. And just as a reminder, I have it sitting here on my laptop on this post-it note that the DoD closes to new questions on October 10th. So then there's that from October 10th to the actual federal deadline, there is a quiet period where if you're planning to submit, you cannot speak directly to a TPOC or a program manager, and you need to post your questions in a public forum where everybody can see them. Types of SBIR and STTR projects: apply an existing technology to a new type of application or process, or develop a whole new technology. Examples would be plastics, drug delivery process, diagnostic, treatment, nanotechnology, its application, its use. Those are some good general examples. How do I get started? You do a keyword search on open and closed solicitations. And when I get to the Innovation Partnership, down the URL here, majority of the links that exist in this presentation are all available on the Innovation Partnership website under Federal Funding Resources and Links. Just to let you know, it's all in one convenient location. Contact a federal program manager or topic author. I have some guidance on this that I can provide. If you're working with us, you should develop a one-page executive summary or as an introduction and send it to the program manager in an email to sort of get them to be encouraging to have a conversation with you and discuss your planned project. Work with the Innovation Partnership or any of our partner organizations. Proposal evaluation criteria, it's different at different agencies, but generally they're evaluated on their own merit for their scientific and technical innovation, experience and qualifications of the team and the facilities, on commercial merit and potential merit, and responsiveness and alignment to the actual solicitation and the topic. So a word about the PI. The PI has to be employed by the small business concern. They can't work full-time for another employer. If they're currently under contract with a university or another small business, they need to make arrangements well in advance of submitting the proposal to have the freedom to operate, to be part of the project team or operate as the PI for that particular project. Different agencies have different rules on the percentage of time that must be allocated to the project. Patent rates. Again, I'm going to have to speed up here because I really do want to tell you about the Innovation Partnership and what we can help provide. But as a rule, patent rights are generally retained by the company. There are some reasons that you wouldn't want to consider SBIR and STTR. One of them is the government timeframe. The solicitation and the topics might not come out in a timely fashion for when you want to apply. The government agenda, the priorities of the topics that come out might not be in alignment with your technology space or innovation space, and it might not be good timing for you. It could be a distraction from your actual business and your research because of the elongated submission, preparation, and execution of funds aspect of the whole process of SBIR and STTR. 1 in 7 chance of approval. Obviously, that's across all 11 agencies for both programs, and that's extremely general. That if you want to know more about actual award potentials at each of the agencies, I have lots of statistics and numbers I could provide you with happily. And the reporting requirements. You have to follow GAAP financing or GAAP accounting. You need to have an accounting package in place. There are lots of other rules in order to be a recipient of these funds and execute on the project in a manner in which the government dictates. So for all those reasons, you know, this particular funding mechanism may not be right for you. And we talk about all of those things when I talk to you directly. Timing. SBIR and STTR is not fast money, nor is it a fast process. So again, managing expectations up front, if you're going into this or you're writing SBIR funding and STTR funding into your business plan as a source of revenue, you need to really understand what that means and how long it's going to take to prepare to submit what may be a winning proposal. You can't just say the deadline's 2 months away. Wow, that's great. I'm going to submit a proposal and craft a proposal and I'm going to get money, because that's not going to work. So, or if you haven't previously received a federal funding award through this mechanism, I should say, that's probably not going to work for you because there's more preparation time and lead time that's necessary. So this is about how long it takes till you the deadline starts to get the award for the different agencies, and this is just generalized. And you know, while this particular grid I think is like 2 or 3 years old, I don't think it's changed much. So here's an example of solicitations and when their deadline is. If you're working with the Innovation Partnership, our deadlines tends to be 4 weeks for a pre-proposal, tends to be 4 weeks prior to the federal deadline. And beyond that, I would need to be working with you, or our partner organizations would need to be working with you on the Innovation Partnership process at least a month or two before the Innovation Partnership deadline. So again, timing is important here. And this schedule is also located on the Innovation Partnership website under solicitations. So I'm going to try to skip through some of these here quickly. Proposal process, registration certifications, open agency solicitations, business response to topics, evaluations of the proposal, and grants awarded. Here are some things you need in advance to submit an actual proposal through this mechanism. And these are general registrations. The FEIN number of the company, physical location, not your garage, and also not a PO box. So those arrangements, if that's not the case, you have to have that in advance. You should have it in advance. The rules say at the time of award, we have found that you should plan that in advance. Again, all those moving parts should be nailed down before you actually submit your proposal. Here's a grid, and this is on the IPart website as well, of the registrations that are required to submit an SBIR or STTR by each of the federal agencies. Again, you have the benefit of looking at this on your device instead of across the room. It's really an eye chart otherwise. This is downloadable, and hyperlinks, there are hyperlinks to all of the registration sites and the agencies in the document if you download it off the website. So let me just skip here so we get to the Innovation Partnership, because I want to have some time for questions and we're getting close. So what we do at the Innovation Partnership is we assist companies like yourselves who are on the call prepare and go through each of the things that I highlighted for the most part, to sort of counsel you on how to submit a winning proposal. And we've developed what we call a pre-proposal, which looks at core competencies of any good federal SBIR STTR proposal, regardless of agency. So it's evergreen, and these are core aspects that should be included in any winning proposal, albeit greatly expanded upon as you flush out your federal proposal. We also, here are our partner organizations. So the Innovation Partnership is supported by 14 different economic development assistance organizations throughout the Commonwealth. So my colleagues at all of these supporting organizations, for the most part, understand how the Innovation Partnership works, and will be able to discuss it with you, or and or assess aspects of your business and or be a value add organization that can assist you with other areas and business needs, hence their involvement with the innovation partnership. So these are those organizations that are greatly helping our companies at different levels in their innovation cycle with value-add services for their companies and or funding and assistance. So we have this model of support where the partner organizations help to vet the clients. We have the pre-proposal review, and we have value-add services of all our organizations, and this is spurring on continued support and successful commercialization of your companies and your innovations. Here are the specifics of our Innovation Partnership Program. We do have some small funding opportunities based upon the pre-proposal review process. So the pre-proposal is completed by you, the client, and sent to me or one of our partner organizations. We provide a general level of feedback and comments to get it into a reviewable form. What do I mean when I say reviewable form? Well, what we've done is we contract out with subject matter experts in your field and match them with your proposed project, and they provide actual technical feedback. That's a free service that we provide. Based on that technical feedback and your pre-proposal, we have an investment committee comprised of my colleagues at the partner organizations that gathers to review your pre-proposal and the technical reviewer comments, and then we can provide another round of funding, another round of feedback, and also then make a funding decision on one of these funding opportunities. So the micro grant and the micro voucher are funding opportunities for a phase 1 applicant, and the federal marketing assistance funding opportunity is for a phase 2 applicant. We do not provide at this moment support for fast track submissions because our experience has been that they have not been successful if the client has never previously received an SBIR or STTR award. A little bit about our accomplishments. We have provided over 600 technical reviews, and our award rate is have SBIR awards in the amount of $35 million since the beginning of the program, which is pretty good. The average award rate across all agencies for the whole country tends to be between 14 and 17%, and ours is around 21%, and we think that's pretty good considering most of our applicants are first-time applicants. So here is the Innovation Partnership website, newly designed, functional on all mobile devices of all sorts. Previously it was not, so it needed a really good refresh. The bookmark or favorites resource link that I was telling you about with the URLs and the hyperlinks to lots of interesting, helpful information about the different agency programs can be found under IPart programs there on the left-hand side. And if you hover over that, you're going to get that orange box, and that would take you to federal funding resources and links. And that's where there's just a ton of links to the individual microsites for each of the federal funding agencies. So that would be a good site to favorite so you're not Googling all the time for them. And hopefully all my hyperlinks still work. So I think that's about it. Again, here's my contact information. And I would look to see here if we have any questions. So I'm looking. So we don't have any questions. All right, then. You can always, if you have questions, you can always send them to me directly at my email address located there, kelly@benfranklin.org. Also, for whatever reason you forget that, there is a contact us on the webpage. That's a fillable form, and you can just send me a note or a message through that mechanism. I want to thank you very much for taking the time to learn more about SBIR and STTR, and I look forward to either working with you or hearing from you or assisting you as you look to submit a winning federal proposal.